We're going to get started now. Thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Keith Plowman. I'm the president of the Fort McMurray Construction Association. I just appreciate everybody being here today. I think this is going to be very good and very informative. Before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge a few other of our local elected officials that are on the call. So Tanny Yao, our local MLA, is on the call. And we've got a couple of counselors. Verna Murphy, I see, is on the call, and Counselor Sheila Lalonde is on the call. And I think that Layla is going to join in a little bit. Layla Goodrich, she's also an MLA, but she's not on yet. But I think she's going to be joining shortly. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the Honorable David Yerdega. He's the MP for Fort McMurray Cold Lake. He was first elected to Parliament in June 2014. He's a lifelong resident of this area, and he's a business owner in northeastern Alberta. He's got a strong understanding of the individual needs and interests of each community in his riding. So David, I'm going to invite you to speak now.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you.
Oh, excellent. First of all, oops. Do you still hear me? Okay, good. It was beeping. Anyways, first of all, I'd like to welcome, Erin O'Toole. He's a veteran. He was in the Canadian Armed Forces. He represents Durham, Ontario, and also, as everyone knows, he's our leader of the Conservative Party and the leader of the official opposition. And, over the past number of years, we have gone through a lot, whether it was the fire, the downturn in the economy, floods, and everything else. And one of the things that I'm trying to push is actually we need to do more to attract more businesses. And one of the things I keep on coming across is the Alaska to Alberta trade corridor. And I think that'll be a huge benefit for our region. We can look at, we can address some of the food security issues in the north. We can look at, processing ore from the north. So it's actually a good thing for Alberta and actually for Canada. We need to do more. And thank you for inviting myself and Erin O'Toole to the Construction Association. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, David. Thank you, Keith. And David was telling me how much the FCMA does to promote growth, construction, and projects in Fort Mac. And it's been great to join you today virtually. As David knows, I wish I could be there in person. But we talk a lot about how we need more Canadians knowing how important Fort McMurray and your contributions to our prosperity is for all Canadians. This is something I think only the Conservative Party recognizes, just how your success has been Canada's success over the last number of decades. And we have to make sure that we are there for you. And in fact, in 2016, as David alluded to, Canada watched as Fort McMurray was devastated by the wildfire that affected 88,000 people in the region. The fire was nicknamed the Beast for a reason. Many neighborhoods, many of your neighbors, many friends had to rebuild. Some are probably still in the process of rebuilding, or at least coming back to normal with the trauma of that episode. But the people of Fort Mac are a great example of the resiliency of Canada. The resiliency your community has shown from economic challenges, shows what it means to be Albertan: tough, hardworking, looking out for your neighbor, and resilient. And this is what both, I think, your organization, Keith, and Canada's Conservatives have in common. We're both focused on rebuilding, looking forward, creating opportunities for growth, and giving entrepreneurs, small businesses, and working Canadians the opportunity to flourish. To that end, a few weeks ago, I introduced Canada's recovery plan, a plan to secure our future after COVID-19. The Liberal government has had Canada lagging at every step of this global pandemic. Canadians deserve leadership. So Canada's Conservatives will enact a comprehensive jobs plan to recover the 1 million jobs lost during the pandemic and continue on from there. We plan on doing that in a year and moving forward, taking immediate action on the hardest hit sectors, helping many of those who've suffered the most, including small business owners, women, young people, and Indigenous Canadians. I know the First Nations in your area, including the Fort McKay First Nations, are an example of resilient and entrepreneurial partners. In fact, I met with community leaders and business leaders when I toured Fort McMurray, both from an oil sands and community perspective, before I became an MP. And I was struck by the work the First Nations band did, the Fort McKay band did on logistics, on partnering on responsible resource development. They show that there's tremendous promise of economic reconciliation. So whenever the Liberal government makes decisions that are anti-energy, anti-pipeline, anti-project, it's hurting your members in the construction industry, it's hurting small businesses, suppliers, it's hurting people who work in energy, and it's hurting many of their partners, including First Nations, that Mr. Trudeau likes to claim to stand up. More and more Canadians need to know what's happening in Northern Alberta, because Fort McMurray is rich in resources, and our recovery nationally will need Canadian energy and resources to fuel our country's return to growth and prosperity. All of you know that we are better off with our high standard, ethical, responsible Canadian energy than we are on bad actor foreign energy. We need more Canadians to understand this. The vibrancy of our cities is tied to the health of our economy and the high performance of our resource sector, including our oil sands. And Conservatives are proud of that. I often say I'm proud of the resources in our ground and the resources in our head, and we will always stand up for workers at every turn. People in your area have been asking the government to respect the economy of Western Canada, to approve and build pipelines and ensure that reasonable tanker access is there across the West Coast. These requests have not just been ignored by the Trudeau government. Worse, he worked against them, and his government looks down continually on energy workers and families that work in the resource sector. That Mr. Trudeau and his advisors live in the Ottawa bubble, that should scare people, because when the Liberals talk about building back better, it doesn't mean you. It doesn't mean families that get up early to work hard in the oil patch or to open their small business or to build things in this country. Conservatives, we value building up Canada. We value Canadian energy. We are proud of the sustainability, efficiency, and innovation, from slant drilling to steam-assisted gravity drainage, the innovation that your region brought to global energy production. Now we need to sell that technology, that innovation, and our resources in markets around the world as ESG leading resources. And this will fuel government's number one job, which is to create opportunities. And when we do that, rebuild main streets across the country after COVID-19, whether the main street is in Fort McMurray or in my hometown of Bowmanville, Ontario, in the suburbs of Toronto. We're going to have a plan to get people working, provide incentives to invest in and rebuild new small businesses. And the construction industry will be leading the charge, because if we're not building, we're not growing our economy. And no one knows that better, Keith, than your members. We have to be building, we have to be moving forward to have a strong economy. And we need housing more than ever before. If our country is to fulfill the Canadian dream, where young families can aspire to own their own home, We need the construction industry to work in overtime. We need more supply. We need better access for first-time home buyers. And we also have to learn the lessons of the pandemic to ensure that our country is more prepared and more self-reliant in the future. So Canada's Conservatives will make our country more self-sufficient. We'll reduce our reliance on regimes like Communist China, and we will take steps to protect the health of Canadians, including having domestic vaccine capacity. That is a failure of historic levels by Mr. Trudeau for us to be so far behind our allies. And finally, the fifth part of our recovery plan will be a plan to secure Canada's economy by getting the budget back to balance over the next decade. Spending to protect Canadians during the pandemic is the right thing to do. And in opposition, the Conservatives have supported it. But we can't pass unsustainable debt to our children and to future generations. Once the recovery starts, the Conservatives will get spending under control. We will let the private sector lead the charge to help us build a more balanced and growing economy. The decisions we take in the next few years will define Canada for this generation and the next. And as the father of two young kids, my greatest worry is failing to leave a better Canada for my children. That's what drives me, and I'm sure it's what drives you. And as we recover from COVID-19, it is time for certainty and competent leadership in Canada again. It's time for ethical leadership in politics and a prime minister that stands up for jobs and economic activity in all sectors of the economy and in all regions. That's why every day I'm trying to connect and tell more Canadians about the vision Conservatives have for a stronger, more prosperous, and more united Canada. And I want you to know that a Conservative government will have your back. We're ready to do whatever it takes to get the economy back on track in Fort McMurray and across Canada. And I think everyone knows Canada's Conservatives got us out of the last recession. And I know we can lead Canadians out of this one too. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I love this idea when David suggested it to me a few weeks ago. And Keith, I look forward to taking some questions from your members.
Sure. So appreciate those words, Erin. If I can speak frankly, you're speaking our language. The people from Fort McMurray, you're right, are hardworking. We just want to be able to do our jobs and make a living and make sure that what we're doing here, we actually have an end market for it. And so I love what you said about pipelines. We did have a couple of questions, and maybe we'll start with the pipeline question since we're talking about that anyways. So the question that came in is, what are your plans for pipelines to increase the movement of product from the oil sands to Eastern Canada to reduce their dependency on foreign oil and for export to global markets? And after David's comments, maybe we can add potentially north through Alaska. So what is the plan to basically get our biggest product to market?
Sure, thanks, Keith. And I should add, I'm known for serving in the military. And David mentioned I'm a veteran. I served 12 years in the military, but my first job that I left home to take before I joined the military was inspecting pipeline for TransCanada Pipeline years ago. And I haven't gotten my hands as dirty as some folks building pipelines, but as a young man inspecting pipeline, and then later as a lawyer working in and around oil and gas for a time, really let me know how important it is for the economy and how important it is for us to get the best possible price for a finite resource. Like, it is a national tragedy every time we see that discount applied year after year, and we're leaving billions on the table because of more limited access. So what I've said I would do, this is a priority because I'm putting it in the first 100 days of a Conservative government. We will eliminate the ideological and quite frankly, divisive policies of Mr. Trudeau when it comes to Bill C-69 and the tanker ban. Not only were both done purely for ideological reasons, both are actually, I think, unconstitutional. But I've spoken with Premier Kenney. At a bare minimum, when 9 out of 10 provinces asked the Prime Minister not to pass Bill C-69, that's pretty darn undemocratic in my books. I don't have to wait for it to go to the Supreme Court of Canada. We are supposed to have collaborative partnerships in confederation. That was Sir John A. Macdonald's goal years ago, was to respect the provinces. So by eliminating those provisions, Keith, I'm not the type of government that is going to buy pipelines or tell you where to build, or you must do this. North, west, south, east, anywhere we can have an environment where the private sector and partners can get Canadian resources to market, I think is what we need to see. We need a predictable time period that is fair for the appropriate level of environmental mitigation and Indigenous consultation. And I think we can do that in a way that allows capital to know that that investment can be realized. I've also said we need a law to prevent the blockading of rail lines, pipelines, airports, ports from this shut down Canada movement and activists that really try and take free speech into economic sabotage. We also need to send a signal that we're proud of our resources. I've talked to Premier Kenney and his team about the ESGI leadership of Canadian resources, environmental, social governance, and Indigenous partnerships. The Fort McKay, why I mentioned it's a great example. I think more Canadians, particularly in Southern Ontario, where people want to see meaningful reconciliation, they don't realize Trudeau's negative policies hold back that economic reconciliation. So I'm not saying this is going to be our priority pipeline. I'm going to set the regulatory environment where the private sector will have a fair and predictable process. The one thing I should add, Keith, and it's brand new today because I announced the climate change portion of our environmental plan. We're going to push to work with the US for carbon border adjustment tariffs to start penalizing global exporters that have commodities from energy to steel and aluminum that don't follow international trade laws. They don't follow or have any form of emission reduction, and they're displacing our commodities and displacing our workers. And I think that's a way to show we're not going to let free riders, whether it's Venezuela or China, to game the system at our expense.
Sounds great. Thank you. Appreciate those words, actually. It's I wish this was getting broadcast nationally because you're saying some good things here. So the next question is talking about existing infrastructure commitments. So the Parliamentary Budget Officer has determined that the federal government is currently over $2 billion behind in its investment through the Investing in Canada plan. What are your plans to get these projects moving and inject much needed stimulus into the economy while closing the infrastructure deficit, rebuilding our economy and improving the quality of life of all Canadians? How are you going to get us back to work?
Yeah, thank you, Keith. And this is something David Yerdega and myself and our Alberta caucus talk a lot about, particularly with the economic challenges that your province faced pre-COVID. To think that there is infrastructure dollars on the books that are lapsing. That's when they lapse, is the government is not spending them. They're making announcements, but not rolling out the money. That is a failure of leadership of the highest order. In fact, you're talking $2 billion. There's some assessments that have said 40% of the infrastructure funds of the Trudeau government over the years have lapsed, meaning they're just not spent. So the money is never deployed. It's announced. Trudeau is the prime minister who's great at photo ops, very bad at the follow ups. This is why we're 50th place in the vaccines. He never gets anything done. It's all razzmatazz, smoke and mirrors. I'm the guy that delivers. I've worked and served in uniform, worked in the private sector. I hold people to account, and we need to get money out the door. When I say Canadians know that the Conservatives, led by an Albertan at the time, Stephen Harper, got Canada out of the global recession faster than any other G7 country, there were two reasons for that. One, your region, because great resource prices helped Ontario, which was lagging in auto and other sectors. Your success helped our country. And more Canadians need to understand that. The second thing is the government had the fastest deployment of infrastructure funds in Canadian history. And John Baird was the minister at the time, and Harper basically gave him the order, out the door, shovels in ground immediately, and we will have accountability. And there's often accountability if we're partnering on provincial or municipal priorities. They have to be shovel ready, or a specific growth priority to leverage more economic output. We put quite a bit of money into the port in Vancouver to open up more markets in Asia, for example. These key pieces of infrastructure should also be a part of leveraging those infrastructure dollars into more economic activity. So I'll tell you, that holds people to account, and we will deliver. Mr. Trudeau will not, and I will look to provincial partnerships, particularly, I see Leila just joined. I have lots of friendships within Premier Kenney's government. In fact, spoke with Premier Kenney last night on some of our issues we announced today. It's time that Canada has a federal partner that is not holding you back in Alberta, but is partnering with you.
So I know we're getting close to the time. Do you have time for one more?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, we'll do one more quickly, just because I think it's a pretty big deal when we talk about construction projects. Yeah, as you're probably aware, the price of lumber is skyrocketing, other raw materials that we need. So this one's talking about domestic manufacturing. We need more of a made in Canada solution when it comes to manufacturing to reduce our reliance on imported goods from foreign actors, specifically China. How do you intend to grow our manufacturing sector? And that includes lumber, steel, anything and everything that has to do with the construction industry. What's our plan for that?
Absolutely. Great question, and something I hear about in many different provinces, yours, BC, Ontario. First of all, we need to restore our strong and integrated relations with the United States. Mr. Trudeau has now failed miserably under 3 different presidents. The media like to focus on the second one, but Keystone, as you know, was canceled by 2 Democratic US presidents. This last one on the first day of their administration. That was an insult. A recognition that Justin Trudeau is not taken seriously. So the Conservatives, we created a Canada-US Economic Committee to focus on energy security, to focus on a softwood lumber deal, to focus on a shared approach to everything from emissions to the carbon border tariff adjustment for foreign players, to align with the US on China with respect to Huawei, steel, aluminum, all this. We need predictability within the North American marketplace. We need to fight against Buy American. We need that traditional preferred access because our economies are integrated. You're talking the Alaska to Northern Canada connections. We are trade partners and allies in the Five Eyes, NORAD, NATO. We need to return that integrated piece. That will give a little more price certainty because of market access. And then the domestic capacity piece, Keith, we're going to be launching more information prior to the election on this. I've been talking about less reliance on China for global trade practices with our to show domestic preference on security grounds to actually manufacturing as well. Once we lose that capacity, it's hard to get back. And we've seen China transship aluminum into Mexico and displace manufacturing. I think we have to start shutting down some of these ways that China and a few others circumvent. And we will also have some funds to help resiliency piece.
Thanks for that, Erin. So really appreciate chatting with you, getting to know you, getting you to share some of your insights with us. Before we go on, I just want to say my personal thanks. It was great to meet you and hear what you had to say. I'll turn it back over to Mr. Udega to just give us some final comments.
There we go. Yeah, I just want to thank you guys once again for allowing us to tell our, relay our message regarding our economy, pipelines, and we look at all options and only together. I mean, whether it's through federal, provincial, and municipal governments, we got to work together to attract businesses to Canada. And one of the things that everyone mentions is we have to be competitive, whether it's in the mining sector, oil and gas, agriculture. We have to be competitive, and if we're taxed at a greater rate than other countries, we're less competitive, and we got to get back our competitive edge. We got to be mindful of the environment, and we got to be mindful of how much we can actually tax people. I mean, it's a real struggle for many businesses to survive with all these different taxes. And another thing that I had many conversations with my colleagues and regarding the time it takes to get approvals and the ever changing environmental regulations. Industry do not have a problem with regulations. It's just the ever-changing regulations. So you can start the process to go through the environmental process, and in midstream they change the rules. So we got to be, as a government, and waiting. We got to ensure that we're going to do whatever we can to ensure that approvals are done quickly. I think Pierre Poilievre mentioned the other day regarding how long it takes to get something done in Canada versus other countries. And we're not very high on being competitive with the amount of time it takes to get a project approved. And once again, I'd like to thank Erin for joining us this afternoon. We're all standing together, and Erin has been a real advocate for our oil and gas. He's been an advocate for being more competitive, and we have different ways of doing it. And once again, thank you for having me on the Zoom meeting here today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Keith. Best wishes of health and success to all your members as well.
Yeah, thank you again.
Thank you.
See you, everybody.
Thank you.